When I originally even went to college, I really wanted to help kind of reconcile religion and science, or religion and psychology. And so I knew that finishing with an undergrad wouldn't be the end, and so I knew graduate school was in my future. And so I really got interested in religion even during my last semester as an undergraduate, and I knew that I wanted to pursue graduate studies and study how can religion and psychology inform one another, and how can they learn from one another, and how can they be used as companions rather than combative enemies. As I started doing more research and I started doing more work, I'm currently an associate professor of psychology at Hope College in Holland, Michigan. Really, what I try to do is I try to focus on what are the different ways that we can become aware of some of just the existential realities of the world, and that can lend itself to human flourishing. So really kind of my vocational goals right now are focusing on looking at what makes for a meaningful life, what's the role of religion in flourishing, and what are the roles of virtues like humility play in helping us live a good life. I love talking to pastors. I love sharing about my work. And usually when I share about my work, they're immediately interested because I tackle some of life's biggest questions and things that are really hard to study empirically. And so usually there's a lot of excitement, there's a lot of interest. You know, I think there are naturally questions that pastors have about the type of work that I do. They want to know, what does make life meaningful? You know, how do you cultivate humility? You know, how do people kind of make sense of some of these deeper questions about death and meaning? What I really value about interacting with and chatting with pastors is I often feel like when I'm leaving those conversations, I've learned more from them. And maybe that's just because I'm a bad teacher, but maybe it's also because I feel like there's a lot to learn. There's a lot for researchers to learn about what their congregation are experiencing, what their congregation is feeling. What it helps is it provides an opportunity for the work that we do in the academy to have an actual place to find home. I'm really passionate about humility. I've been studying it since graduate school, so more than 10 years of research on humility, and the culmination of that was in the summer of 2022, I published a book on humility called Humble that kind of tried to summarize the state of research in a very accessible way. But the reason why I'm really passionate about humility is I think it is probably the chief, if not the chief, the second chief virtue in Christian life, right next to love. So I think of love and humility as being right there. And so I see it as so core to what Christians do. And sadly, I think it's one of the least cultivated virtues among Christians and in Christian life. And in fact, I think that currently our culture and our Christian church is oriented more around certainty. It's oriented more around having the right answers. It's oriented more around being able to defend your beliefs from this imaginary other who is coming to take everything precious away from you. And to me, that's not a mark of humility. The reason why I think humility is so important is I think it has existential import. I think if we're not humble, two things are going to happen. First of all, I think that people who aren't humble probably are going to experience a pretty radical crisis of faith at some point, because they're not going to be able to make sense of the suffering that they experience in the world. And the second thing is, I think one of the surest ways that people can convey to others that their religion or their ideology is not worth following is by demonstrating flagrant arrogance. To me, humility, it seems critical and it seems so necessary to develop. But sadly, it's one of the things that people want in others. So when I mention to people I study humility, they're like, oh, that's great, I'll give your book to my father-in-law. But no one really says, oh, that's the thing I want to develop, because in part, we think we're great at it. And in the other part, it's really hard to cultivate. Humility has been wildly misunderstood. And so there are a lot of myths surrounding humility. So I like to think about humility as being the right size in a situation. Not too big, but also not too small. Right? So if you're being too big, that ditch is arrogance. And most people are aware that we shouldn't be arrogant. But the ditch on the other side is being too small. And that's something like servility or cowardice, right? That's not humility. And I think because of that, humility has been used in some degrees by some people as a tool of oppression, particularly against minoritized groups or groups that have not had historically access to power or privilege. So women, people of color have often been told, just be humble, as a way of being told, well, just stay in line. And that's not authentic humility. In my view, authentic humility begins with a sense of enoughness. It's a psychological security that knows you're already loved, you're already worthy, you're already enough. And if you can start with that, you don't have to respond defensively when people disagree with you. You can consider the needs of other people as equal to your own, and so you don't have to be egotistically consumed with making sure that your needs are getting met. And you don't need to put yourself above others and over-perceive your superiority as a way of making yourself feel better. So can you check your selfish motivations, and can you reel in your natural impulses to only take care of your own needs? And then finally, can you go beyond yourself? Can you consider the needs of other people? Can you respond to them with empathy and respect? For the past five or so years, I've been really studying religious de-identification, so people who are leaving religion. So we've heard a lot about the religious nuns. I study the religious dones. So these are people who are done with religion. And one of the things that we're seeing in this research is that the religious landscape in the United States is changing, and people are leaving the church in pretty high numbers. And so one of the reasons why they're leaving the church, in my estimation, is because they feel as though the church is not equipping them to deal with the changing cultural demands of this moment. And so one of the things I think that's important to consider is, what are the ways in which we're doing church in a way that's not meeting those needs? What are the ways that we are contributing as an organization, as a church body, to this mass exodus, this mass disillusionment? And then more forward thinking, what are the ways we may just need to rethink what we're doing and be something that we haven't been before? So it could be that, a lot of people see people departing from church as a bad thing, as, oh my goodness, we're losing so many people, this is horrible. It could also be that we're on the precipice of a new spiritual revolution, that we're looking at a maturation, we're looking at a different experience or instantiation of religiosity that we haven't seen before. Some advice I might offer is, how could we be thoughtful and responsive to those shifting demands? How can we change what we've done to meet the spiritual needs of people who may say that they're done with religion, but they're not done with spiritual connection. They're not done with a need for a greater meaning. And in fact, they're not done with a strong desire for a supportive community. So how can we be thoughtful? How can we be responsive? And how much are we willing to change? Because it might look radically different than it currently looks now. So sometimes my message is not very welcomed, right? So I bring my message, it kind of sounds like doom and gloom, I'm an Old Testament prophet, right? But what this resistance usually is bound up in is oftentimes clergy or pastors think that what I'm sharing is in fact some existential threat, right? That what I've told them is, your congregation, your organization, the thing you've poured your life into, is becoming increasingly irrelevant, or it's going to become extinct. And that's not truly the message at all. I think the message I'm trying to convey is the way that we have been doing things, it worked for a time, but it's no longer working. Right? So if you think about the way that many of us learned how to drive, I learned how to drive on a 1964 Nova station wagon. I put my hands at 10 and 2. That's totally fine. The reason why that's fine is that car didn't have any airbags. Now they teach people to drive with your hands at 9 and 3. Why? Because if the airbags deploy, your hands get blown to the side instead of smacking yourself in the face and giving yourself a bloody nose. It's just small adjustments based on changes in our world and in our culture. And so even though I oftentimes experience resistance when I share this message, it's not that I'm saying that pastors are necessarily to blame or that the church institution is doomed and is going to become extinct. Rather, what I'm suggesting is that we think differently about how we might need to adapt and how we might need to radically reconceptualize the way that we're engaging people's spiritual needs. It has. So this research has come home for me. So the very first interview I ever did on humility, the person wanted me to ask my wife if studying humility actually made me any more humble. And so let me provide some context. When I took this interview, it was on a Friday, and it was a day that I promised my wife we were going to go to the beach. It was during the summer. Michigan has some harsh winters, but the benefit, the reward is you get these lovely summers. So it was supposed to be Beach Friday. We were supposed to leave at 10. So what do? I schedule this interview at 10. And I tell my wife it's only going to take 15 minutes. Well, an hour and 15 minutes later, I get done with the interview. She's already packed the lunches. She's packed the beach bags. She's been patiently waiting. I come up the stairs, and not only have I kept her waiting, but I say, I'm training for this marathon. The lake is 7 miles away. Would you mind schlepping all of our stuff out there? And I'll run out there and I'll meet you there. By the way, how humble am I on a scale of 1 to 10? Well, she gave me a 4 out of 10, which in retrospect, that was probably pretty generous. I was probably acting pretty arrogantly. That was a good moment for me to realize I can be really steeped in this intellectually, and academically, I can have a very strong understanding of what humility is. But it also reminded me that I'm a human being, and I'm also living in a culture where the moving sidewalk is always moving toward arrogance. And unless I'm actively taking steps every day to counter that, I too, like everyone else, am going to fall into the narcissistic traps of our world, and I'm going to struggle being humble. It was very daunting to try to write a book about humility. I am not the expert on that. People who are close to me or know me well understand I still have areas to grow. But what I would say is studying it has recentered it in my life as a priority. And it's helped me remember why this virtue can be so powerfully transformative. And it's kind of helped re-energize my enthusiasm for making it a point to try to become more humble each day. Some of my work studies on the human motivation for meaning. And my very earliest work in this in graduate school was I wanted to see how strongly motivated people were to perceive their life as meaningful. So I thought, what better way to do that than to threaten their meaning in life? And so rather than just tell them their life was meaningless because they would just say, well, of course it's not, and rattle off all these reasons, we developed this implicit priming technique where we subliminally threatened their meaning in life. Sure enough, time and again, when we replicated this, what we find is people reliably say that their life has more meaning after experiencing these threats. So what it suggested to us is even on this unconscious, implicit level, people are really strongly motivated to perceive their life as meaningful. So we see this thread of really needing meaning throughout all aspects of life. And I think that there are good parts of it, and I think that there are some dangerous parts of it. So the good parts of it are, I think this means we have a strong need for connection with other people. I think this means we have a strong desire for spiritual connection, and we have this desire for something bigger than ourselves. The downside of having a really strong need for meaning is we overprescribe meaning where it just doesn't fit and it doesn't make sense. So I've also studied suffering a little bit. And one of the hardest and most dangerous things that we can do is overperceive the meaning in our suffering and say things like, well, God just wanted to teach me a lesson, or this horrible tragedy happened because God needed another angel in heaven. Sometimes life is just cruel and miserable and horrible things happen, and our desire for meaning actually makes things worse. And sometimes our desire for meaning actually gets in the way of us comforting other people who are grieving. Because the best thing that people need, what people really need when they're going through a tough time, is just presence. reassure them that what they're going through is pretty terrible. What they don't need is for us to try to reassemble our shattered worldview and put together our assumptions of a good and loving God when in this moment kind of seems rather absent. And so while our desire for meaning is powerful and it's beautiful and it does a lot of lovely things, over-prescribing meaning where it doesn't fit can be one of the hardest things, and it's actually a wedge that drives a lot of people away from the church.
That was awesome.
Oh goodness, favorite TV show. I've got two. Am I allowed to have two, or do I have to? Okay. So my favorite TV shows are Friday Night Lights. Just such a good 5 seasons. And then other favorite TV show is Stranger Things. So, yeah.
What was your favorite band in high school?
Favorite band in high school? Probably Nirvana. Yeah.
Okay, you're done.
What was your favorite band in high school?
Probably MXPX.
Okay, all right. That's pretty good. Yeah.